Welcome to the Infowars Nightly News. I'm David Knight. It's Monday, April 29th, 2013. Now tonight we've got an amazing interview with Sibel Edmonds, and she's going to talk about CIA connections to the Boston Marathon bombing. But first, we have a public service announcement for you from Infowars and the U.S. government.
He did what we all must learn to do. You and you and you and you. Duck and cover.
Be sure and remember what Bert the Turtle just did, friends, because every one of us must remember to do the same thing. That's what this film is all about. Duck and cover.
Suspect 1 is dead. Suspect 2 is on the run. We're asking people to shelter in place. In other words, to stay indoors with their doors locked and not to open the door for anyone other than a properly identified law enforcement officer.
This is an official civil defense film produced in cooperation with the Federal Civil Defense Administration and in consultation with the Safety Commission of the National Education Association.
Well, that's a pretty old film, isn't it? But some things just don't change. You know, whether it's a nuclear holocaust or one untrained 19-year-old unarmed on the loose in Boston, you can always count on your government to keep you safe. You can go to sleep now. Everything is just fine. You've got that sense of security that the government gives you. You know, when they had the first duck and cover drills, I was a child in elementary school, and the Cuban Missile Crisis was coming up, and they were telling us that we weren't going to have enough time to get back to our house if nuclear war broke out. So we needed to duck and cover. We needed to make sure that we put our head inside of our metal desk chairs. And even as an elementary school student, that didn't make any sense to me. Later on, I thought, why were they even telling us that? Were they trying to preserve some fragment of dental records in case of a nuclear holocaust? I don't know, but it's absolutely insane. And so is the idea that the government is going to protect you with a lockdown. Did you catch that? He said, don't open your door for anybody except the government. That's right, the government who's going to come to your door with fully automatic weapons aimed at your head, demanding that you let them in and that you come out with those guns pointed at you. It's absolutely insane. But of course, looking at that duck and cover drill, it was also brought to you by the NEA, the National Education Association. That's right, the government schools, the same people that are training our children to go through all kinds of metal detectors and scans and police state treatment, and you guessed it, lockdown in school. That's where it's headed. Well, the word actually is getting out, though, to Americans that maybe things aren't exactly as I say the government, as the government is saying they are. Multiple polls have said that Americans are more afraid of the government than they are of terrorists, even. So we see that even though in the wake of 9/11, the interesting thing about this is the way we see this trending. Just before 9/11, more people felt that they did not want to give up their liberty for more intrusions on their security, and that was about 40% to 33%. But what happened immediately after 9/11, we see that flipped dramatically to 71% agreeing that they would sacrifice personal freedom to reduce the threat of terrorism, and that kind of held for several years, up to about 2006. Then the numbers began to fall. And interestingly enough, this most recent poll was taken the day after the Boston bombing, and there was a slight advantage. It was 48% to 41% said that they would not give up their liberties for freedom. That's kind of interesting to see that start to change. And I think part of that is that people are understanding not only that the government is unable to provide that kind of security, but also understanding the whole concept of false flag and seeing how the government is creating a lot of these threats that they're trying to scare us with. Another thing that's interesting is how that breaks down by political affiliation. In that Fox News poll, they found that 51% of Democrats were willing to throw away their freedoms for the promise of security. Roughly half of the Republicans, 47%, but the ones who were really hanging in there, the ones who weren't buying the government line, were also the ones who weren't buying this party line, this false dichotomy of left and right, Republican and Democrat. Those people, only 29% of them were willing to trade their liberties for the promise of security. Now, as we see things developing in the Boston Marathon bombing narrative, as we see the government constantly changing its story and coming up with another story that contradicts the previous one, one thing that's kind of hanging in there is this whole idea of a lone wolf terrorist that is radicalized by some lone wolf radicalizer. And I don't know. I mean, are really that many people falling for that? George Bush even seems to have some questions with that narrative. Let's take a look at this.
Terrorism in Boston.
Yeah.
Many people have wondered if it took you right back to 9/11 when you heard it.
Well, at first, you know, I was deeply concerned that there might have been a organized plot. I don't know all the facts. I don't think we all know all the facts, but I was deeply concerned that this could have been, you know, another organized, highly organized attack on the country.
Did you catch that? Another he stopped it right there. Another conspiracy theory, maybe. Is he talking about another one like 9/11? That was, after all, the context. She said, you know, when you think about this, does this bring back any memories of 9/11? And one of the things he says is, it might be another conspiracy, another organized attack. Well, the mysterious Misha is this guy who would not only radicalize the brothers, but evidently he provided these guys who were on welfare, he provided them with brand new sports cars. That doesn't really seem to be what we expect from someone who is a radical Islamic hyper-religious terrorist, that they would be providing him with sports cars. But now we have the mainstream media trying to sell us that narrative, and we have a reporter go to the home of a man named Alak Verdov in his home in Rhode Island. It's a lower middle class neighborhood where he lives in a modest, tidy apartment with his elderly parents, and yet we're supposed to believe that this guy not only radicalized them, but provided them with things like sports cars, and that they were radicalized even though they were living a very westernized lifestyle. Now this guy, Misha, they're trying to sell us that Misha is Alak Verdov, he said he never met the Tsarnaev family. He said he's never met them, and yet the mainstream media is trying to sell this narrative that he is the person who changed them. We do know, however, that Tsarnaev is connected to the Caucus Fund and the Jamestown Foundation. Those both have CIA connections. And they also have connections to people like Zbigniew Brzezinski. And we've got an interview coming up, and I want you to stick around for that, because someone whose expertise is in this area of the world, Sibel Edmonds, she worked as a translator for the FBI, and she knows that area very well. She knows what was happening in the 90s, and she has uncovered and is showing us CIA connections that are far more damning than just these connections to the Caucus Fund and the Jamestown Foundation. So stick around. Right after the news, we're going to have that interview with Sibel. Now, speaking of hidden motives, we see that the more illegal immigrants go on food stamps, the more J.P. Morgan is enriched. That's right. They made about $560 million processing electronic benefits transfer cards for people on food stamps. They get between 31 cents and $2.30 for every single person on food stamp. And it has become something that the U.S. Department of Agriculture is actually selling. They're providing the Mexican government with literature that actively encourages illegal immigrants to enroll in food stamps. One flyer contains the following message in Spanish, and this is being supplied to the Mexican government to give out to Mexican citizens. And it says in Spanish, "You need not divulge information regarding your immigration status in seeking this benefit for your children." And that phrase is bold-faced in the flyer, so they make sure that they see that. Over and over again, we see a pattern in both the welfare state and the warfare state of fostering, in the welfare state, a dependency, and in the warfare state, fostering insecurity. And we also see another pattern, and that is large corporations like J.P. Morgan, large corporations like the military-industrial complex and General Electric, the owner of MSNBC, profit from the warfare state and the welfare state. And this is just the latest example of that. Some people, however, have spent their entire life fighting this. And one tireless person, I want you to hear a quote from Jim Tucker, who just passed away. He said, "If 100 of the world's best-known sports figures or film stars were gathered at some exclusive resort behind closed doors for a private meeting, the entirety of the mass media would be on hand, clamoring for admittance, demanding to know what was going on, but when the world's richest bankers, media barons, industrialists, members of royalty, and political leaders were meeting secretly and discussing public policy matters that impacted on the course of the world's affairs, the establishment press never said a word. That's a quote from Jim Tucker, who passed away. Now, Jim spent most of his life following the Bilderberg conference, something that for decades people would ridicule him and laugh at him. People would deny that it even existed. Yet he followed this as an investigative journalist, and he stayed on the trail as really kind of a lone, you talk about lone wolf terrorist, he was a lone wolf truth seeker. And basically he kept on this until everybody else kind of fell into line and began to know about it. I'm reminded when I think of his single struggle, I think about William Wilberforce, who kind of single-handedly tried to wake up England about the moral issues of actual slavery. And in the same way, Jim Tucker labored alone for a lifetime to wake people up from their slavery that was based on their ignorance to what these people were doing. These are people who meet annually, and as he said, they're some of the largest industrialists, royalty, politicians. They meet and they decide what they're going to do with the world economy and how they're going to manipulate events. We recently had uncovered a 1955 document from Bilderberg back in 1955 where they were planning the euro. And they get together and they plan things like it was a very detailed plan about how they were going to have a unified European currency that was going to replace the sovereign control over currency in each of the individual countries and create a European Union. And we see how that's not really working out for the people of Europe. It's a kind of slavery, not only just by destroying the sovereignty of the country, but also enslaving people economically by destroying their economies, by creating a liquidity process, then coming in and putting what they call technocrats, that is, bankers from Goldman Sachs, in place of elected Democrat representatives. So yes, Bilderberg and some of these other shadowy organizations that hide in the shadows, they have a very real impact on what's going on in the world. And here with a special report from Darren McBreen is something a tribute to Jim Tucker.
My name is Jim Tucker. We're at St. Marie, Switzerland for the Bilderberg meeting. Well, this year Bilderberg is strongly committed to expanding the war with the invasion of Egypt so they could have a big war. They use the term big war a lot in the Middle East because that will generate profits. They want them all involved in a big war. Right. They want a war throughout the Middle East, with the exception of Israel. And as I said, there's big profits to be made from war, because when you go to war, you're making tanks, airplanes, trucks, jeeps, and all kinds of war materials, which is profitable in its own way. And then the war profiteering kicks in, as it has in all of our wars, where other big bucks are made on top of the big bucks. Yes, as I've said before, the page one story in the Financial Times, 1 hour speech delivered by Secretary of Defense Robert Gates, calling for bigger NATO involvement in combat missions, more NATO support for the wars in the Middle East. Very rough-sounding 1 hour speech. It appeared on page one of the Financial Times, and the Financial Times has been attending Bilderberg meetings for decades, and so they keep the promises. So they identified, they said he simply spoke to a private group of luminaries or something to that effect. I've got the clipping here. It did not say Bilderberg. He delivered the speech to a private meeting of financial leaders or consultants or some such variation without identifying as Bilderberg. Well, my source said that was exactly the speech he gave, because he was inside there listening to it. Maybe got a text. And he said you can depend on, use quotes around wherever he is quoted directly. You can quote him directly. The rest of the story is complete and accurate also. So go ahead and have fun. They intended that to be a message to get out in a way that would not be traced back to Bilderberg. It was kind of silly for them to think they could do that. Every American, whether he's a civilian shyster or public official, is committing a criminal act by simply being here under the Logan Act. The Logan Act passed shortly after our country was established, 1787, I believe. And it makes it a crime for public officials to meet with private citizens to make public policy behind closed doors. They can do it in the open, where everybody can observe and question, but they cannot do it behind closed doors. The apologists who say, well, that Logan Act was so long ago, two answers. First of all, if it was passed by the Congress and never repealed, it is still the law of the land. And to the apologists who worry about it being so old, as if that mattered, I'll point out to them that it's been amended and expanded and strengthened several times by Congress over the years, including deep into the 20th century. They've added and expanded the Logan Act. So they're criminals when they attend, and they should be prosecuted.
Is Robert Gates himself worried about that?
I don't think they're worried at all, because nobody ever challenged them except for, well, they're worried a little bit more now because of the great Ron Paul in Congress.
Jim, about the wars, so many countries in the Middle East, dozens of them, have had protests and riots and coups and destabilization. Has Bilderberg been behind most or all of that, or what do you know?
It has been promoted, and of course the President of the United States is always controlled by Bilderberg, and they have members, high officials of the White House attending the meetings for the purpose of getting their instructions. So yes, there's a big involvement. We've seen some dramatic departures, such as Bill Clinton, who attended Bilderberg as the obscure governor of Arkansas, is elected president the following year. George H.W. Bush had been a Trilateral Commission participant, and he had promised in his campaign for election not to raise taxes. He said he was in favor of the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, which has first been proposed by my publisher and has since become law. Then Bilderberg ordered him to raise taxes. So he raised taxes and lost the election for breaking a very solemn campaign pledge. But Bill Clinton was right there. It is under Bill Clinton that NATO became the standing army of the world, of the United Nations. He invaded Kosovo. Clinton was the most bloody-handed draft dodger to ever disgrace the White House with his presence. And I've mentioned his good points. I've not gotten critical yet. So we attacked Kosovo, killed thousands of people. We have 0 casualties in that brief war. Americans love a brief war when we don't have any casualties. The reason we didn't have casualties is our planes flew so high out of range of the missiles on the ground that they could not target their bombs. So we bombed a bridge, killing a lot of school children on a school bus on the bridge. We bombed a McDonald's and killed some more. A lot of innocent, dead civilians, little children, mamas, daddies. And to go to bed each night with that blood on your hands, I don't see how they can do it, except the Bilderberg rationale for wars is we need the population control. They're now yelling that we'll run out of Earth in 30 years. We've got to control the population. Well, one way to control the population is for young men to die in wars.
Is Henry Kissinger ashamed or afraid that he has to skirt every country he visits and sneakily enter and exit all the time, given his age and acumen?
I suspect with his ego, he's proud of it. But he's a very affected character. One time, a few years ago, I walked up to him at some kind of reception and said, Dr. Kissinger, you remember the Bilderberg meeting, named the time, space, so forth, and this long white-haired guy said this to you, but I couldn't quite hear your answer. He said, that was a private meeting. Then he called himself, have to affect the German accent, that was a private meeting. Too late, though, I caught him on that. He's been here since he was 14 years old, fled Germany under when the Third Reich was being established. His brother, whom I've never met, but people who know him, says his brother speaks English like a native, but he affects that accent for some ego reason, and he's always been Dr. Kissinger. Well, David Rockefeller also has an economic doctorate from one of those snob schools, but he's Mr. Rockefeller. He's not Dr. Rockefeller.
Jim, can you talk about how long you've been covering Bilderberg, and what do you think about all the young patriots who are now confronting them wherever they go?
It's wonderful. I first started chasing them in 1975. Well, physically in about 1980. We had reporters working on it before, but I wasn't satisfied with their work, so I did it myself. I assigned myself to cover Bilderberg. Yes, it's gotten better every year because when I first started covering those kids, I'd be the only guy there. They always had a low-key story in the smallest local newspaper, preferably a weekly, in whatever town they were in, to explain that these nice guys are meeting, to let the public understand that even though this place is sealed off by armed guards, it's only good people doing good work. When Bilderberg has a meeting, there's a big publicized economic meeting of some sort with an easy plane ride, helicopter ride. So that's their cover story. They were in town that weekend for this big meeting of financial ministers, and then they came home. Well, before coming home, they go to Bilderberg on Friday night and leave on Monday morning. But that covers their butts as far as being out of Washington or out of Paris or whatever. I think it was at Helsinki. We had learned about the Bilderberg location quite early that year in November. Our subscribers in Europe, and there's very few of them, comfortably cost so much to subscribe with the air mail and all the postage rates, long-distance postage rates. So there's a tendency for 10 people or 20 people to contribute to the subscription and then share the paper. And one of them wrote back, this is before the age of the internet, it was a matter of just regular mail service, a letter saying, should we alert the local media? Well, I kicked myself in the butt 15 times. I should have thought about that years ago. And the answer was yes. So it was a lot of fun. We got to the airport in Copenhagen, or I think it was, and they're getting off the airplane to jump in their long black limousines with the police escorts for an ego trip to the resort about 20 miles away, and some take the helicopter. But as they get off the plane to head for their limousines or helicopters, they're greeted by a throng of reporters, print reporters and broadcasters, lights flashing, and to see the terror in their eyes was just a lot of fun. How shocked they were to confront the media that way. And then it started making it big in the newspapers. I mean, top paper in Paris, the top papers in London had heavy and good stories raising the question, why are there these distinguished people having such a secret meeting? So, and every year since then, our lasses in the circulation department would print out a list of all of our subscribers within a 200-mile radius, and they get a letter asking them to alert the local media about Bilderberg. And every year it gets bigger and better. More young people are becoming aware, older patriots too.
Can you also talk about two things that happened this year at the same time? The host country challenged their right to meet in the way they do, and yesterday they filmed actual members walking outside the grounds, which you say has never happened. Can you talk about those 2 points?
Yes, the walking outside the grounds, I think, for the first time ever. Always before, once they get behind the sawhorses and armed guards, they stay inside. They walk around on some grounds that are far, far away, but none where you could actually speak to them and they could hear you. I think they probably decided that we need to reassure, since we've had all this horrible publicity in big newspapers and little newspapers and big and little, small broadcasters giving such heavy attention, we better make some kind of a public relations move. So we'll walk to this place and we'll smile at them. If they ask a question, if we could give them a sweetheart answer, we'll respond graciously. If not, we will be unable to hear the question and be sorry, and maybe a little wave. So I think that was another case of them being forced to do something they would not normally do, to confront the fact that there's such increasing public awareness that a lot of them are in great political danger, or even being Bilderberg. Already we've seen leading members of Congress used to always attend. The Speaker of the House, Representatives, ranking senators would attend. Now they don't dare, because they get mail from their own constituents. Their own voters in their own congressional district are in their home state for the senators, saying if you do business with these criminals anymore, we'll never vote for you again. We'll vote for anybody else. And they've been politically frightened out of the ballgame. They're already long gone. And more, I think more are feeling very hesitant, very eager to cover their butts when they come to Bilderberg, like Secretary of Defense not being on the list, when the Secretary of Defense always attends Bilderberg from the United States, along with the Secretary of Treasury, who's here, and Secretary of Commerce, other high officials in the administration. I tell you, I had the pleasure of talking to Kenneth Clark one time when he was in Washington. He thought he was going to hold a press conference to discuss, I forgot, some international issue. I'm there, and I asked the first question. I said, Mr. Clark, you attended the Bilderberg meeting. I had notes in front of me, named the dates, the exact location, and the exact town and country on these dates. Can you tell us what transpired? The other reporters from the New York Times, of course, never heard of Bilderberg, but they're real interested in this. Kenneth Clark's face goes blank. He fumbles around a little bit. Then he started answering questions. I remember him saying, yes, we should have a world government. We will have, this goes back a few years, of course, when they were real optimistic. We will have a complete European Union, a common currency. Then we'll have the American Union, and your common currency will be the Mario. Then we'll have the Asian Pacific Union, and they'll have a common currency. And our grandchildren are going to laugh about the days when we had all these petty little currencies. We have to have a world government so you have peace and all that jazz.
Maybe you can see it here. Obviously, they're getting high quality video at the same time. This is streaming live at the moment. Historic concept on its way. It must have been a fleeting visit for whoever is in that helicopter, because the conference only started officially this morning. Nothing goes over the mountains.
Well, I couldn't think of a better daily quote to have on the day that we're remembering Jim Tucker than this one that you may have heard from Samuel Adams. He says, "It does not take a majority to prevail, but rather an irate, tireless minority that is keen on setting the brush fires of freedom in the minds of men." And sometimes it's not just a minority, but it is a single person like Jim Tucker. Now, stay tuned after the break. I'm going to be joined by Jakari Jackson. We're going to talk about whether or not the U.S. government is actually targeting patriots and Christians. And then, as I mentioned, we're going to have an amazing interview with Sibel Edmonds, and she's going to talk about CIA connections to the Boston Marathon bombing. Stay tuned.
Authoritarian control freaks throughout history have sought to make populations dependent. The United Nations openly has talked about using food as a weapon against the Third World and the industrialized First World. State Department Memorandum 200, developed by Henry Kissinger, called for destroying the food capacity, not just of the United States, but every country in the world, so they could use food scarcity as a political weapon of control. Just a decade ago, less than 10 million Americans were on food stamps. 4 years ago, it was 25 million. It's now reached almost 50 million. Socialist health care is designed to destroy our health care system. The establishment wants you to be a bunch of cowardly, dumbed-down people who can't stand up for yourselves. That's why they're rushing to try to restrict citizens owning firearms. Because since the early 1990s, gun ownership has gone straight up, while violent crime has gone straight down by 49%. And globalist-controlled strongholds like Chicago and New York, where they've taken the citizens' guns, have the highest crime rates in the world. What am I getting at here? The system doesn't want you to be self-sufficient. That's why I promote the fact that you should go out, buy firearms, and go take lessons and learn how to use them. I want you to stand up for your birthright of liberty and freedom. During a serious meltdown, they're going to tell you, hey, you want food? Turn in your guns. And that's why we need to put the globalists in check. And then finally bring them to checkmate by being self-sufficient, by being prepared, by having a garden, by learning how to can your own foods, by having friends and family and community that will stand together. But at the heart of that is having quality, storable foods. And that's why I went out more than a decade ago and found the very best food company to be my sponsor, eFoods Direct. They're the company that I personally use for my emergency food storage preparation, whether it be for natural disasters or the tyranny that is intensifying. So give them a call, 800-409-5633. That's 800-409-5633. Or efoodsdirect.com/Alex to find the weekly and monthly specials. But they're always running the specials where you can get the free 6 meals and the eFoods Direct audio CD put together by the experts in storable foods to answer all your questions, the eFoods planning guide, the eFoods brochure, the eFoods catalog, plus 6 free meals, creamy potato soup, tortilla soup, and cheesy chicken rice, so you can sample the high-quality storable foods from eFoods Direct. They've got a bunch of other specials.
The 2-week food supply provides one adult with 81 servings of healthy, delicious, storable food for 14 days.
The 1-month food supply provides 192 servings for 28 days.
And then there's the 1-month family food pack. It will change the way you look at the food in your pantry. Every time you eat one of these meals, you are eating healthy, delicious food and saving a lot of money.
The 3-month food supply, 576 servings of storable food for 91 days.
And the 1-year food supply will provide you with 2,304 servings of healthy, delicious, storable food for 1 full year.
Your meals are as delicious and nutritious tonight as they'll be in 25 years.
Bottom line, there's a bunch of specials at efoodsdirect.com/Alex. You can also call them at the toll-free number on your screen, and they can send you a catalog with all the specials detailed and tell you about the weekly and monthly specials that they're always running. efoodsdirect.com/Alex to find all the specials, or call the toll-free number. And so in closing, when you buy from efoodsdirect.com, you are supporting the radio broadcast, the nightly news, the magazine, the films, and everything we're doing. Because we're not like MSNBC or Media Matters that get government and corporate funding to bring down America and bring in tyranny. We are funded by our sponsors and you, the viewers and listeners that support them. Again, that's efoodsdirect.com/Alex or 800-409-5633. And when you're also visiting Infowars.com or PrisonPlanet.com, you can click on the banners to take you to the weekly and monthly specials. It's like the Hank Williams Jr. song, "A Country Boy Can Survive," because you can't starve us out and you can't make us run, because these boys were raised on shotguns. Well, there aren't really a lot of good old boys left anymore, are there? And those that are out there are demonized and are enemy number one by Homeland Security. And good old boys come in all shapes, colors, and sizes. They're people that aren't chumps, who understand that they're going to take care of their family and that nobody else is. They're people that understand that if somebody else is taking care of them, that makes them a slave. And that the government doesn't want you dependent because they want to build a great future for you. They want to get you dependent so they can social engineer us. So the answer is get self-sufficient, become men again, and tell the New World Order to go straight to hell. Alex Jones signing off for Infowars.com and eFoods Direct, our great sponsor.
Welcome back. Now, in spite of recent legislation like the NDAA and CISPA that they tried to pass through and gun control that they tried to pass through, and in spite of things like massive stockpiling of ammunition and the recent martial law lockdown in Boston, we're told that we don't have anything to fear from government, that they come in peace. And so we're kind of concerned when we see some of the actions that they're doing that don't really match to that. And here with a special report is Jakari Jackson. Jakari?
How you doing, David?
Doing good.
Now, we were talking to Alex yesterday on the Alex Jones radio show, and he said, hey, how about you guys get a bunch of these clips together, a bunch of these articles together, and just show people that patriot groups as well as religious groups such as Christians are being targeted. But it doesn't stop there. You know, people being patted down at the Super Bowl, and we'll get into all that with a few minutes that we have here. Let's go ahead and get right into the articles, guys. DHS buys 7,000 full auto assault rifles. The Department of Homeland Security recently put out an offer to purchase 7,000 full auto, quote, assault weapons to be used domestically, and Mike Adams points that out, to be used domestically inside the United States of America. The juiciest part of this bid is that it's to be used for personal defense weapons to be described as AR-15s purchased by DHS. Apparently, as Mike Adams points out, when the government has an AR-15 fully automatic, it's a personal defense weapon. But David, if you go out and buy a fully automatic AR-15, it's then an assault weapon.
That's right.
And this doesn't just go to things like guns and bullets. We'll touch on the bullets in 1 second. But David, I want to show you this clip. This is a clip we've shown before, but I want people to see it again. This is DHS with their armored trucks and tanks using these things domestically. They're using these domestically. These things aren't for overseas.
Absolutely.
They're going to use these domestically for warrant sweeps. Let's go ahead and take a look at that clip.
For Homeland Security investigations. Well, we have our big vehicle out here. It's our armored vehicle. It's an MRAP vehicle. It's mine resistant, ambush protected. That's what it stands for. And this is what we use to deliver our team to high-risk warrant services. This is the only entry in the vehicle here, so all the operators, we've modified our particular vehicle to have the skids on the sides so that we can have operators on the side and just get off the vehicle.
So, Dave, we saw right there in that clip, that's an actual DHS representative saying, hey, we're going to use these domestically on the streets of America.
Well, of course they're going to use it domestically. It's Homeland Security.
Yes, and
Homeland
that's what
Security.
People can't understand. It's Homeland Security. This is the homeland.
I mean, when you talk about the militarization of the police, you talk about the federalization, centralization of control, that's what everybody's been scared of for decades. Some of the people early on talking about that with the John Birch Society, and everybody, oh, they're crazy. You know, I mean, that was just, they didn't answer the charges. It just called them crazy. Now we see the federalization of the police, the militarization of the police like we've never seen it before at an accelerating pace.
Yes, and I want to cover a few more of these articles, then we'll go into who they're targeting and how they're targeting. But let's move on to this next one. Super Bowl fans to face mandatory TSA pat-downs. We'll scroll down a little bit. Americans are more likely to be killed by peanut allergies, bee stings, and in bathtubs, as points out by Paul Joseph Watson. This is a quote from an NFL official. Fans can expect to pass through metal detectors and a pat-down search. After the pat-down, so you go through the metal detector to the pat-down, and after the pat-down, you will be asked to unzip your coat. Your bag will be x-rayed, said NFL Chief Security Officer Jeffrey Miller. So this is what we're seeing, like as we've been saying for a long time. The TSA has moved out of airports. They're going to your football games. They're in Viper teams growing up and down the highways and byways, and they're saying, hey, you're going to get the full TSA treatment at your football games.
And again, it's sporting events. And
shopping malls,
just as we're seeing now with the Boston Marathon, right? That's another part of the controlled narrative that they're going to go to sporting events to do this stuff. You've got to be, and people who are going to sporting events typically seem to be people who are the most complacent about this sort of thing, because they're really kind of caught up in this. It's easy to catch people up who are in this whole team sports type of thing. It's easy to catch them up into a us versus them paradigm, you know, a USA type of mentality like we saw in Boston. So it's very easy to do that with people in the sports field.
And especially you think about something like the TSA, not the TSA, but the Super Bowl, the World Series, the NBA Finals. If you pay $5,000 for a ticket and you get to the gate and some guy's standing there with a glove, you may just go ahead and go through with it because you've already, you know, got
it's
your
like
hotel.
when you travel at the airport. You know, it's like, well, am I really gonna? I have to be. You know, I've either got reservations because it's a pleasure trip, or I've got a business appointment that I've got to make. Am I really going to fight this now? I mean, you know, they just abridge the Constitution and know that they're going to do it at a nexus where you can't really fight them easily. Most people won't.
Right, and we're going to do this one last article, then we'll move into the groups that are actually being targeted. After huge ammo buy, DHS purchases bullet-resistant booths. The Department of Homeland Security recently stoked concern by contracting a company to provide them with 450 million rounds. That's an old number of hollow point bullets. It's now over 2 billion. Now the federal agency is also purchasing bulletproof checkpoint booths that include stop-and-go lights. So this is how they're going to control you if some type of disaster or something happens, and we'll get to the groups that are being targeted in just 1 second. But day and night, we see they have the guns, they have the vehicles, they have the bullets, they have the checkpoints, they have everything that they need to control the American populace.
The hallmark of tyranny has always been checkpoints, civilian checkpoints, identity checkpoints. When you see that in an old World War II Nazi film, it's always the Nazis doing that to people.
Papers, please.
Yeah, exactly. And they did that again when they wanted to make some kind of an iconic scene where they showed tyranny being imposed on people in Red Dawn that was just redone. Of course, they have people going through identity checkpoints. When they've got a stop-and-go light on these booths, that's exactly what they're going to be doing. And this is a Transportation Security Administration. It was never about just airports.
No.
Okay, they always had a much larger mission in mind.
And it's not just transportation. We've seen the TSA at Romney events.
Yeah, yeah, and like you said, it's sporting events. So it's not even though it says transportation, they're not going to be limited just to streets and roads and buses and trains and airplanes. But those are the choke points. Oh, yeah. You know, that's going to be their focus, because one way that they control you is to control your movement.
Exactly. Now let's go into the groups that are being targeted and how they're being targeted. We'll go to the article here. Police train nationwide that informed Americans are domestic terrorists. A secret report distributed by the Missouri Information Analysis Center, that's the MIAC, lists Ron Paul supporters, libertarians, people who display bumper stickers, we'll talk about that in 1 second, people who own gold, or even people who fly the U.S. flag, and equates them with radical race hate groups and terrorists. So David Knight, if you fly an American flag outside your home, you used to be viewed as patriotic. Now you're a potential racist terrorist.
That's right. And this is a report that was broken by Infowars back in 2009. Here's another quote from that report. The militia subscribes to an anti-government New World Order mindset. Okay, and you know, militia is a word that's perfectly valid in the Constitution and elsewhere, but they've demonized that word to mean somebody that is a terrorist, essentially. They've conflated those two ideas. And they say that this creates a threat to law enforcement officers. They view the military, National Guard, and law enforcement as a force that will confiscate their firearms.
Imagine that when they do door-to-door gun confiscations in Oakland.
Yeah. And this was only 4 years ago. This is only 4 years ago. And of course, you know, we were delusional conspiracy theorists because we said that the military and the law enforcement might go door to door confiscating firearms. It's just a couple of weeks ago.
Because they already did it in Hurricane Katrina. Yeah. And then we had to go talk to these police chiefs and city councilmen, and like, that had never happened in this country. It already has.
Yeah. Like I was going to say, a couple of weeks ago, you and I were at the Austin Capitol. We talked to the Austin police chief, and it's like, oh, nobody's going to go door-to-door confiscating weapons, and here we are. They're going door-to-door confiscating weapons now, using the template of the Boston Marathon bombing and the martial law that they did there. They're using that just like they used SWAT teams that were developed by Daryl Gates out in L.A., and people adopted that all over the country. They're adopting this door-to-door, highly militarized, even more so than the no-knock SWAT team raids, which have even those, especially those, have no place in a free society, have no place in America if they were going to follow the Constitution. Now they're taking it to an even higher level.
Yeah, and I just want to touch on the bumper stickers. If you get the new Infowars magazine, that'll be out very soon. It comes with 3 free bumper stickers in the magazine, so get your bumper stickers and put them on your car, but you may be deemed a potential terrorist, so I'll put that disclaimer on there as well. We'll move on to our next article, West Point Combating Terrorism Center Report, Understanding America's Violent Far Right. Now, guys, you may have to hang with me a little bit. If you can scroll down to section 3.1.2, Anti-Federalist Movement, and we'll look at that section. Anti-federalism is normally identified in literature as, quote, the militia or patriot movement. Anti-federalist and anti-government sentiments were present in the American society before the 1990s in diverse movements and ideological associations promoting American anti-taxation, gun rights, survivalist practices, and libertarian ideas. So which is to say, if you're a libertarian who likes to go hunting and camping, so you have survivalist skills, you don't like paying your taxes, as many people don't, and you want your guns, you're some type of extremist.
Hey, I've got news for West Point. Anti-federalist sentiments were present before 1990. They were present before 1790.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? I mean, that's the stream of political thought that gave us the Bill of Rights in the first place. Mm-hmm. The anti-federalists who were very skeptical of centralization of power. And you know what they said would happen? Exactly what we're seeing today.
Yeah.
Okay, they said it would be the hallmark of tyranny if we centralize power, that eventually that consolidation of power would come back to bite us, and we see that happening right now.
Mm-hmm. And now I want to touch on this part. If you guys can go to the bottom of the article, it says, to conclude, it should be noted that historically, some of the anti-federalist groups have absorbed racist and Christian identity sentiments. Nonetheless, the glue binding their membership and driving their activism has been and remains hostility, fear, and the need to challenge or restrict the sovereignty of the federal government. So even though they may have certain Christian identity sentiments, there's still these violent extremist groups that feed on hostility and fear.
If you were to show them the Bill of Rights, they would consider that to be an anti-government.
It's extreme.
Yeah, extremist document. Yeah.
Freedom is extreme.
Absolutely.
So we ended that one article talking about Christianity and religious groups. So let's move on to our next one. Army officer officially labels Christian groups domestic hate groups. And guys, I know this is on the fly, but if you look at the article, you can see the C email here. If you can open that in another tab, and we'll go to that in just 1 second. AFA has obtained the 14-page email sent out by Lieutenant Colonel Jack Rich, telling other officers and soldiers at the Fort Campbell, Kentucky, that specifically the American Family Association and the Family Research Council are domestic hate groups because they oppose homosexuality. Now, if we can go to that email, I don't want people to think that we're just blowing smoke. So when they get that update, we'll show people on the screen. He doesn't just list Christian groups, he lists, other groups as well. But I definitely want people to see that it's in there. So when you guys get that up, just go ahead and
Well, when you see that email, it's basically a shopping list from the Southern Poverty Law Center. They've got every group in there and exactly the same sort of things. As we said earlier today when we were on the radio, what the Southern Poverty Law Center has done, they've actually inspired a hate attack on one of these very groups, the Family Research Council.
Right.
He was inspired by SPLC flyers to go in and try to shoot people at the Family Research Council.
Oh, yeah.
It's just a mainstream Christian organization.
Mm-hmm. But people don't want to talk about that. They just want to see, you can see it right there on your screen. It says, if you have a Christian identity, and they also say if you're anti-gay, and there's other things on there as well. If you're a sovereign citizen, we saw those people demonized on 60 Minutes. There was an episode where a gentleman and his son were, quote, sovereign citizens, and they ran around killing police officers. And now many police are, conditioned to believe, oh, if they say they're a sovereign citizen, if they pull out a constitution, you better duck and cover, you better call the SWAT team because these guys are going to kill you.
Absolutely.
That's just one example of it. Now, those people were extreme, having shootouts with the police. That's definitely extreme.
Before you go to the next article, Lieutenant General Jerry Boykin, retired. Okay, he's now the Family Research Center Research Council Executive Vice President. That's one of the two groups, American Family Association and the Family Research Council. He said, this is a continuation of a pattern we've been seeing in our military for about 3 years now, probably going back to the MIAC report. And he says, what they're doing is changing the culture of the military. Because what they're doing is saying, this is not Army values, right? And they're attacking mainstream Protestant Christian organizations and saying, this is not Army values. This is designed to, as he says, change the culture of the military. And we have to be very concerned because, we often talk about the quotes from Jefferson saying that a central bank was worse than a
standing army,
Right. But we have to understand that a standing army is also a danger.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? It's not just the Federal Reserve, but it's a standing army. And they took care to make sure that wouldn't happen in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. They were not to have a permanent army. There was supposed to be a militia that was basically under control of the state governments and not a centralized federally controlled, standing, permanent army like we have now. They knew that that would lead to endless foreign wars, as we've seen, and they knew that it would eventually lead to the oppression of citizens, as we're now starting to see here with us.
Exactly. We'll move on to a couple more. Reaction. Army officer's message to subordinates denigrates Christian values. Pentagon spokesman George Wright told the Fox News channel that the Army is looking into the origin of the email, adding that, quote, any belief that the Army is out to label religious groups in a negative manner is without warrant. Haven't they been doing that to Muslims and other groups long before we got to Christians? And we just showed you the article from Lieutenant Colonel. This guy is no slouch. He's no private. He's no, I don't know what you call him, low-grade guy who just had an internet connection and decided to send out an email. This is some top.
He's a lieutenant colonel. He's got a lot of people reporting to him. When you're a lieutenant colonel, you've got a lot of officers underneath you. You've got a lot of personnel underneath you. And it's a very long to list that he has on that email. So he sent that out to a lot of people. And as far as I know, the military has not apologized. Pentagon has not apologized. They have not reprimanded this lieutenant colonel, and I don't think there's an apology that's come out from that lieutenant colonel. I might be wrong, but as far as I know,
that hasn't happened either. And we'll move on to a couple more here. How the U.S. military would crush a Tea Party rebellion. Now, this article starts off with a fictional scenario, so I'll say that to begin with. A right-wing militia inspired by the Tea Party movement has taken over the city of Darlington, South Carolina. That's your fictional scenario. Then we'll scroll down here a little bit, guys. The article titled Full Spectrum Operations in the Homeland, A Vision of the Future, was written by Kevin Benson, a retired Army colonel. So now we see a retired Army colonel, and also Jennifer Weber, a history professor at the University of Kansas. We'll scroll down a little bit more, guys. They cover everything from an all-out war to counterinsurgency and nation building. In fact, the Army's operating concept for 2016 through 2028 considers highly likely a future where the U.S. is threatened by, quote, radical U.S. citizens operating domestically and abroad. So they're saying that they expect by the year 2016 to be dealing with some type of opposition, physical opposition.
You know, when we did this report, there was, at the beginning of the year, there was a slew of these military drills all over cities in the United States and coming pretty rapidly. And we did a report on that. And in one of these reports, they were talking to somebody from the military, and he was saying, well, you know, you want to train in a scenario that's as close as possible to what you're going to operate in. Exactly. So if you're going to operate in a coastal region, you want to train there. If you're going to operate in the mountains, you want to train there. And so the implication is that they have chosen these scenarios, just like what you just talked about. They've chosen these scenarios very carefully to match what they're going to be doing. They're thinking about this. They think of you as the enemy if there's a Tea Party. We've seen drills that have been done at schools where they tell people, oh, there's disgruntled homeschoolers that are, you know, it's why your school's under lockdown. And then they create these narratives that make villains out of Christians and homeschoolers and that sort of thing. And they're training for the scenarios that they're going to execute. And when you look at them doing joint exercises in these U.S. cities, they're doing it with the police. And so you got to ask yourself, you know, if they're training to take over Iran or Syria, do they think that they're going to have the Iranian police or the Syrian police cooperating with them? Because that's the scenario under which they're working. So they're going to be taking over this city in cooperation with the domestic police force. So over and over again, we see them doing the same sort of thing.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the drills, because that actually brings me to my last article. Now, last week there were several drills within the United States. This is just one particular one. Let's take a look at this. Best place to raise a family to be rattled by gunfire and military helicopters. The Pentagon has announced it will conduct an urban training event in the Chicago suburb of Tinley Park. This happened last week. In addition, the military, in collaboration with the local public safety agencies, will hold helicopter operations in the night sky. So, David, just what you were talking about, what you reported on earlier this year, the black helicopter drills, the tanks rolling around on the streets, and this is just one. This is just one thing that happened last week. There are also drills in St. Louis and many other places, as well as the door-to-door gun confiscation in the city of Oakland.
Yeah, it's pretty scary. Great report, Jakari. Well, last Friday we talked to Sibel Edmonds, and she said, you know, the real drill was not a bomb drill, but the drill to see how Americans would react in the aftermath of martial law being declared in Boston. And as you just heard, we've got the USA chants. Unfortunately, I think some of the people, at least in Boston, failed that test from a standpoint of rationality and the Bill of Rights and freedom. But we're going to be talking to Sibel after the break, and she's going to fill us in on Gladio B. If you know anything about the false flag attacks that happened in Europe, Operation Gladio, you want to stick around for this.
Ted Anderson, president of Midas Resources. With over 30 years of experience in the precious metals business, I can tell you without a doubt, we are facing the most dangerous and volatile times, not just in the United States, but worldwide. Peace of mind is gold and silver. Now is the time to invest in gold. When it comes to bullion coins, our prices are competitive and the closest to melt. If it's numismatics you're looking for, we have some of the best deals out there. Visit MidasResources.com today or go to Infowars.com and click on the link to see our daily specials. Here's an example of one of our long-term specials we've been offering for more than a year. 2 silver dollars from the turn of the last century, plus 2 powerful films, The Obama Deception and The American Dream. We also add in the book Dishonest Money, all for $72 and free shipping. The most trusted name in precious metals is Midas Resources. Call 1-800-686-2237 or go to Infowars.com. I'm Ted Anderson with Midas Resources.
We are now only entering the edge of a global financial superstorm, the likes of which the planet has never seen. Here in the United States, the private Federal Reserve is giving more than $85 billion of taxpayer money a month to themselves and other offshore foreign banks. And the worst part is, we have to pay the bank's interest on the money we give them. There is now a race between the global central bank mafia cartels to see who can devalue their country's currencies the fastest. We are already seeing big increases in inflation at the grocery store and the gas line. This will eventually lead to hyperinflation. More than a dozen top globalists like George Soros have been buying record amounts of gold while at the same time bad-mouthing it to the public. Don't just listen to what they say, watch what they do. For more than 6,000 years of recorded human history, gold has been the ultimate hedge against uncertain times and inflation. Before investing in metals, it is important to do your own research and find a reputable company. Midas Resources has the highest Better Business Bureau rating of an A+. Unfortunately, very few precious metal companies can boast that. Midas Resources has assembled one of the most educated, researched, and professional teams of brokers in the industry. The evidence is overwhelming. In uncertain times, gold and silver is safe harbor. Now is the time to invest in gold. Call 800-686-2237 and Midas Resources will mail you 10 reasons to own gold absolutely free. No shipping. It's absolutely free. And finally, Ted Anderson wants to challenge you to find any deal that comes close to his 2 silver dollars at cost with free shipping with 2 free films and a book for $72. That's more than $160 value for $72 shipping included. Click the link at Infowars.com to go to the MidasResources.com specials page. Brought to you by MidasResources.com and Ted Anderson, the trusted name in precious metals.
Well, it's painfully obvious to everyone that the Tsarnaeva brothers were part of a larger conspiracy. Even W used the C word.
There might have been a organized plot, but I was deeply concerned that this could have been, another organized, highly organized attack on the country.
But C doesn't just stand for conspiracy. It also stands for CIA. And the CIA has their fingerprints all over the Boston Marathon bombing. Now, when it first happened, we were very concerned because it was being used to forward a domestic agenda of a police state. Immediately, we were told that it was right-wing terrorists. We were told that it was a new 9/11. And immediately, we at Infowars were looking for signs of previous false flag terrorist attacks. In other words, a bomb drill, something that is taking place that is exactly the way the attack was, at exactly the same time, exactly the same place. And that's why we shut down the press conference, because they didn't want to answer Dan Bidondi's direct question about was there a bomb drill going on there. So clearly, this wasn't just a crime. And we've had people criticize us because they want to fall into the official narrative, and it's somehow unpatriotic to look to see if justice is being done. Well, you know, justice means not only that you don't frame the wrong people for something, but it also means that the guilty are found and prosecuted, and that means all of the guilty, not just a couple of people. If they were involved in the bombing, we want to know who was behind them, and it's more than just a mysterious Uncle Misha. There's a much larger context here. Not only is there an agenda to create a domestic police state, there's also an international agenda, perhaps, that may have some kind of a deal being worked in the background for the U.S. to have clearance to go after Syria, while Russia has clearance to go after some Muslim terrorists in Chechnya. And here to give us a broader background on that is Sibel Edmonds. Now, Sibel Edmonds is a former FBI translator and whistleblower. She had some key evidence in the September 11th terrorist attacks, and she was put under a gag order by some judges and what she could say about it, but she did put out some key intelligence information that is linked to developing current events about who was behind the Tsarnaeva brothers, who was directing them. Joining us now is Sibel Edmonds. Sibel, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure, and thank you for having me back.
I want to talk about Gladio Part B. You've got a long series on boilingfrogspost.com about that. But I want to get first to the breaking news about Uncle Ruslan. It's all over the news today and this weekend. There's information breaking about Uncle Ruslan. What can you tell us about his connections to this guy, Graham Fuller, the CIA, his father-in-law? Tell us a little bit of information about Graham Fuller. You've known about him for quite some time, and you've got a lot of information on Graham Fuller.
Sure. Well, as we know, the infamous uncle, has been very vocal in putting and packaging this message together on the radicalization of the Boston terror suspects. He has been key. He has been featured extensively and intensively, in all the mainstream media, CNN, nonstop, of course,
exactly.
CBS.
I thought it was very interesting that I'm sorry to interrupt you, but they talked to his mother, his father, his aunt. They're immediately saying that he's set up. We get interviews from some people who knew the younger brother, said he wasn't really kind of a hateful guy. He was a real normal Western kind of guy. But then Uncle Ruslan comes on, and he's the only story that gets out there. You just hear him over and over again. He throws basically his nephews under the bus and says these guys were, lonesome. They were radicalized. They were hate-filled loners who had no friends. All sort of But I'm sorry. So this is Uncle Ruslan. Tell us about Uncle Ruslan's connections with the CIA.
Well, right there, at that point, people should have asked themselves, why is it that the mainstream media and the quasi-alternatives keep playing this guy? Where did he pop up from? This is really interesting, right? And this is around the time that nobody was talking about the CIA, and I put the analysis out there. We produced the video. This is about a week, 10 days ago, talking about that nobody's mentioning the CIA. Everybody's putting the focus, the spotlight on the FBI. Well, as we started preparing that, lo and behold, the news came out that the brothers, the suspects, were attending Jamestown Foundation conference overseas, over there, in that part of the world. And Jamestown Foundation is the extension of, it's very closely related to the CIA. And of course, the mainstream media did not at all cover this angle. And then about a couple of days later, thanks to the real alternative media sources, the news came out that the infamous uncle, mainstream media's darling, Washington Post and New York Times darling guy, happened to be he was married to a very infamous, a very shady CIA operative. His name is Graham Fuller, and I'm going to get into Graham Fuller in a second. So this man, the uncle of the Boston terror suspects, he was married to one of the top CIA operatives in that region, Central Asia and Caucasus, Graham Fuller. Not only that, in 1990s, this guy, this uncle, he lived with the CIA guy in his house in Maryland for almost 1 year, okay? Yeah. This news came out and nobody covered it, and a couple of quasi-alternatives, they put a spin on it, and they said, because they interviewed this guy, this infamous guy, Graham Fuller, and Graham Fuller said, well, yes, he was married to my daughter, but it's ridiculous for people to link anything of, any of this to the CIA. Well, of course, this alternative, quasi-alternative, they put a spin on the story, they twisted it, and the headline said, Graham Fuller denies any connection to the CIA. If you go and read the article, Graham Fuller confirms that, yes, he was this man's father-in-law. And then again, we will talk about Graham Fuller in a second. So this came out, and also the fact that the uncle was also working for USAID, which anybody who's awake knows that, again, is another operation field for the CIA when they want to get into some country, and they always put some of their people together with USAID. USAID and CIA, they have this joint partnership. Okay, let's put it that way. So again, about 10 days after we put the analysis on CIA, emphasize that fact. Now, all this information is coming out only through the alternative media. These are supported, documented. Even Graham Fuller, the CIA operative, is saying, yes, I was his father-in-law. I mean, this is really big. I mean, when people put these pieces together, how this uncle was played, okay, how he was placed under this intense spotlight, okay, how he became the darling, the representative, and he's the first source talking about the suspect's radicalization. As you know, before that, I mean, the people, these suspects' friends from Boston, they're saying they were very modern, going to nightclubs, hanging out in expensive Beamers. They were hanging out with Turks. They were not hanging out with the radicals. Then, bam, their biological uncle comes and he says that. Well, of course, naive people would right away say, here, even their uncle says they were radical Muslims, so that must be true. And of course, MSM played it. On the other hand, when these connections are pouring out, again, thanks to the real alternative media outlets, there is nothing. You don't see anything in the mainstream media. And this is why, from the beginning, from weeks ago, we started pounding the fact that the MO here, with everything that we see on the ground, and considering the region, Chechnya, the Central Asia Caucasus region, this carries CIA's MO, not the FBI's. And we presented the both background and context of why the CIA MO and why CIA connection here.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit, because it's pretty obvious when you look at the lifestyle of these guys. Like you mentioned, they've got expensive sports cars, even though the family is largely on welfare here. So obviously they're getting money from some extra source, okay? Whether it's Islamic terrorists or whether it's the CIA, it's obviously they're not lone wolf guys, right? But you've got the uncle, as you just pointed out, someone who has had a history of working for a CIA front corporation in the area, and then you've got him married to the daughter of the CIA's top guy in the area. I mean, he wasn't just CIA. Graham Fuller was very high in the CIA, and that was his area of specialty, was right there in that area.
Absolutely, David. You aced it there, because, you see, people can't say, well, here it is, Sibel Edmonds coming and talking about Graham Fuller and saying she now knew about this guy. If they go to my document website where my case is totally narrated, to justicitizen.com, and if they click on State Secrets Privilege Gallery, they will see a list of names of top individuals with their pictures there, okay? Actually, they will see the pictures, and then later they will get to articles that name these individuals. Because of the gag orders, because of the state secrets privilege, in 2007, I put this gallery of these more than a dozen individuals as the key players and the key FBI targets, the key FBI investigations targets between 1996 and 2002, to give people the clue about why the state secrets privilege, why all the gag orders, which all had to do with United States through CIA and also to a certain degree NATO, creating, training, arming, radicalizing the Islamic factions in Central Asia and Caucasus, which also tied to 9/11, because as part of these operations in Central Asia and Caucasus, we continued working with bin Laden and Ayman Zawahiri. We're not talking about 80s Mujahideen in Afghanistan. We are talking about mid-1990s all the way till 2002, February 2002, which actually covers a certain period of time post 9/11, okay?
Right, and you figure very prominently in the 9/11 investigations, because you're working as an FBI translator at the time. You came across some key intelligence. You had gags put on you, and this is what you were saying when you were on the radio on Friday. You said over and over again, in the FBI, you guys would intercept intelligence, and somebody from the CIA or the State Department would come in and basically shut it up. And the key part of this is that, as you said, the narrative is often told that, hey, 9/11 happened because of blowback. 9/11 happened because we interjected ourselves in a very ham-fisted, clumsy way into foreign countries' internal affairs, and we wind up interjecting ourselves into every war. We wind up making enemies out of both sides, and they come back and they pull some stunt like this. But what you were seeing was people who are actually being run by the CIA and the State Department as a front group. And when somebody like Rachel Maddow says that we think that Obama is the global head of Al-Qaeda, it's like, yeah, I'll go with that. I mean,
correct. And I want to also make this point that I worked for the FBI 2 days, 3 days after 9/11. However, I worked with several FBI field offices, not only with Washington field offices, but my main area had to do with Turkish and Turkic countries. Turkic countries refer to Central Asia and Caucasus, okay? They speak variation of Turkish language. My major field with the FBI had to do with this investigation that FBI started in 1996. So some of the stuff that I was looking, translating, analyzing, going back, getting verbatim translations on, some of those occurred in 1997, 1998, 1999, and we also had real time, and this is right after September 11, on this particular investigation that George Bush shut down in February 2002.
And just to clarify, let me clarify before we go any further, your area of specialty was the Turkish area and the Caucasus, and that's exactly what we're talking about with Chechnya. That is correct. The Caucasus region of Russia. So that, you know, where this is all going back to right now with this, with the Tsarnaeva brothers and everyone, that is exactly the area of specialty where you were translating documents back in the mid-90s.
Correct. And these documents originated from the investigations which started around end of 1996. So basically, these operations for FBI, and this is domestic counterintelligence, the targets were not only foreign. The targets were also U.S. individuals, some of them in Congress, many of them within the State Department, some of them undercover CIA operatives in that region. They were also operating here in the United States. And again, we will get to that when we talk about Imam Fethullah Gulen, and when I start talking about Graham Fuller. Graham Fuller was a CIA operative that was part of this Operation Gladio in Turkey, Central Asia, and Caucasus. And in mid-1990s, he was a key figure in CIA's radicalization and training, arming, and also carrying out some of the biggest terror attacks within the borders of Russia in that region. So he is, we will talk about him, and we will get into that, and we will also talk about Gulen.
Now, exactly. When we get into, let's start talking about Operation Gladio Part B. Give us some of us know, and Darren McBreen did a great report with a fellow who wrote a book about Gladio. Now he's a British fellow now living in Italy. And it's very well known in Italy because in the 70s, there was a wave of terror. Aldo Moro, the Italian prime minister, was killed. You had everybody that was alive at that time was hearing stuff about the Red Brigade this, the Red Brigade that. As time went on, it was revealed that these really were false flag operations because the communists were gaining politically in the area, and it was actually NATO running false flag operations and blaming it on the communists. And of course, then we were told that Operation Gladio had been shut down. But you have some other information about that. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. The information you just provided, absolutely. And this is a documented, I mean, even now the classified documents from Italy and even here in the United States says, yes, we did that. We and NATO, we carried out these false flag operations. However, they say that these operations ended with the fall of the Soviet Union, okay? So end of 1980s, 1991, it was dismantled. That is the official narrative. It is not correct. while the cells that carried out false flag operations and terror attacks, okay, in most part of Europe, they shut down, and that includes Italy. They left, and this is the CIA and NATO, they left one major cell open and untouched, and that is the cell in Turkey. And again, if people, they go and look at the history of Turkey and Operation Gladio, they will see that Turkey was a prominent player. Turkey is a NATO member, yes.
Oh, yes.
And, okay. Well, they did not shut down that particular cell because of the incredible importance, significance of this area, Central Asia, Caucasus. Look at Turkey, Muslim country. These Central Asian countries, these Caucasus regions, they are Muslim. Turkey, they speak Turkish. Well, 90% plus of this region, Central Asia, Caucasus, they speak Turkish languages, okay? Different dialects of Turkish languages. Also, you're looking at shared heritage. So the great game was we continue, we keep alive and intensify one cell, we shut down the rest. And that cell was the Turkish cell in order to go, and this is against number one, Russia, but the region also included the region in China that is referred to as Xinjiang, Uyghuristan, East Turkestan. These are various names people refer to that area. Within China territory, this area, they are Turkic, they are Turkish people, they are Muslims, that's why they call them Turkestan, that's the other name for it. So with this cell, NATO and CIA, they pinpointed various small Islamic factions. This is right after the fall of the Soviet Union, okay? Chechnya, people, faction in Azerbaijan, in Kyrgyzstan. And they started recruiting and radicalizing them in order to use them against Russia. Okay, so this started in mid-1990s, and it is still Operation Gladio. In FBI, the investigation, FBI named it as Operation Gladio Plan B. Now, another name can be the Phase 2, Operation Gladio Phase 2. And if you look at least I can tell you this much, until 2002, the biggest terrorist attacks that occurred within Russian soil, okay, coming from individuals from Dagestan or Chechnya, they were completely directed, armed, and orchestrated by NATO and the United States, CIA. And this is, I'm talking about every single major attacks up until 2002. I've been out of the FBI since April, May 2002. So until at least that point, and this is still after 9/11, okay? This is not before 9/11. That's what we were doing. And one of the individuals involved in this, in orchestrating, one of the main operatives with this was Mr. Graham Fuller. And Graham Fuller, CIA operative who was stationed in Turkey, but again, his main task, he was part of the team from the CIA that worked with NATO in pinpointing, training, arming, radicalizing these factions in Central Asia and Caucasus, and bringing about, these terror incidents in the region.
Now, back in January, on your website, boilingfrogspost.com, you recorded a 4-hour series on Operation Gladio Part B with Steve Corbett. Everybody really needs to see that. It's really fascinating. It's an amazing story. Anybody that likes a good spy novel, truth is much stranger than fiction. And there's a lot of information there, but I want to play this brief clip where you talk about Operation Gladio Part B.
The Turkish paramilitary Gladio operations in those countries, overseeing these thugs and these operations, these false terror, false flag operations, not only in Turkey, Central Asia, Caucasus, a lot of Chechen operations.
Now, again, going to the narrative that this isn't just blowback from angry Muslims, but it's a larger, more calculated plot. Let's talk about this Imam Gulen. Because I think that's really key. When we see how this guy fit into Turkey and we see how he's brought back and used by the CIA, it really does kind of put the lie to this whole thing that this is radicalized Muslims that are blowing back against our foreign policy. Tell us a little bit about Imam Gulen.
Yes, Imam Fethullah Gulen, up until 1996, 1997, he was this radical Islamic preacher, okay, and not really high-level guy. This guy doesn't even have elementary level education. He was kicked out of school by 4th grade, so he didn't even get high school diploma. He was your typical preacher who would basically preach Sharia laws and talk about why secular government in Turkey was not right for an Islamic Muslim nation, that it should be thrown out, and people should, you know, have revolution and replace the government. And this is the Kemalist Atatürk government put in place since the early 1990s in Turkey, and replace it with Sharia laws, okay? Now, initially, the Turkish government didn't take this guy very seriously. As I said, he was like a low-level guy. But he started actually creating a semi-significant movement in Turkey by actually getting some money, raising some money, and establishing some small madrasas in Turkey, and send kids to the, you know, to the poor children who couldn't attend regular schools, or poor children who came from a more radical Islamic background could attend, okay? Now, in 1996, Operation Gladio, and this is right now in Turkey, we're talking about Turkey, they decided that what was happening in Turkey with some of their factions within Gladio, they had to be kicked out and they had to disappear. So we have a major scandal taking place in Turkey in 1996, early 1997, referred to as a major, this is like a Watergate scandal in the United States, called Susurluk, okay? And during this time, the Operation Gladio operatives, and this is NATO and US, they decided that this guy, Fethullah Gulen, would be fantastic as one of the fronts in operations in Central Asia and Caucasus, okay, because they saw that he was being a bit successful in Turkey. Meanwhile, the Turkish government, and this is the secular military regime in Turkey, they indicted this guy, Fethullah Gulen, this mullah, this imam, because of his radical views and his advocacy of this Sharia law, and they wanted to sentence him to 10 years in jail, okay? Now, what happens is, during this time, while he's under this indictment, lo and behold, Imam Gulen, inside the Gulf Stream, takes off from Turkey, okay, and lands here in Washington, D.C., United States. So in 1998, they set him up. They
in a Gulf Stream jet that's owned by the CIA, right?
That is one of the documents and the facts that came out during Susurluk and after Susurluk investigations. Of course, mainstream media did not cover it. In fact, mainstream media in the U.S. didn't cover any of this because Fethullah Gulen, this mullah, this radical Sharia guy, was our guy, okay? And we needed him for the operations. So he came to Washington, D.C. He was given this temporary visa. He was given a lavish house, okay? And he set up this NGO in the United States, this Islamic NGO, in 1998, and started raising hundreds of millions of dollars in the United States. Now, again, think about what I've been telling you about FBI and our investigations, because these operations in Central Asia, Caucasus, had actors here in the United States. And that included Mr. Gulen, Fethullah Gulen, Imam Gulen, and also his handlers, CIA handlers. And his main handler for Fethullah Gulen, Imam Gulen's main handler was no other than Graham Fuller of the CIA. Because he's supposed to be is expert in Islam, and with all the time he spent, of course, in Turkey and leading some of the operations, terror operations in Central Asia, Caucasus, he was Fethullah Gulen's handler. People, and this is a parenthesis here, people will say, what proof do you have for this? Well, the Department of Homeland Security, they wanted to kick out this guy, Imam Gulen, in mid-2000, 2005, 2006. They said he expired his visa and we want to kick him out. And also he has some suspicious activities. And of course, FBI investigations of Fethullah Gulen, right? Guess who stepped in at this point? And people can go online, go to Google, okay, or you can go to my website, boilingfrogspost.com, and put...
Let me guess. Was it Graham Fuller?
He was one of the handful of neocons and CIA operatives. Graham Fuller went further. He actually testified. He put a letter saying that U.S. should value this guy. He was one of our most important Islamic, moderate Islam partner in et cetera, et cetera. So this is all documented. You can see Graham Fuller's name. You can see his letters on behalf of Fethullah Gulen. And another individual, for example, who sponsored, and he also is named in these court documents that people can see, is Mort Abramowitz, okay? So basically, if you look at Gulen's sponsors, you are looking at people like Mort Abramowitz, Graham Fuller, you're looking at Richard Pearl. You see basically a lot of PNAC guys. Well, the same guys were also the top players in one way or another with the Operation Gladio Phase 2, okay? So I'm gonna go back to Gulen getting here, setting this NGO. Between 1998, while he's in U.S., while his NGO is operating here with hundreds of millions of dollars, Fethullah Gulen opens over 350 madrasas. These are radical Islamic schools and mosques in Central Asia and Caucasus, okay? While he's living here in the U.S., through his NGO in the United States. Okay?
Yeah.
And this between the period 1998 till 2005. Again, this is documented. In fact, some of the more, I guess, Russian allies in terms of Central Asian countries, they kicked out and they banned this man's radical madrasas and mosques. Okay? And again, this guy's handlers happen to be Mort Abramowitz, Graham Fuller. Okay? And right now, currently in the United States, Fethullah Gulen, Imam Gulen's NGO, is worth more than $20 billion.
Wow.
Nobody knows where the money is coming from, okay? Nobody. There has been, and again, people can find some European publications, mainstream European publications. In Holland, currently in Netherlands for the past 3 years, Fethullah Gulen movements have been under investigations because they have some network in Holland as well, okay? They were kicked out of Russia. Russia banned their schools. They had it in Russian territory, okay? So again, this is public information. This man has been living in the United States since 1998 with operations that we are carrying out, radicalizing, Islamicizing, factions within Caucasus and Central Asia, okay? His handler, even the court, U.S. court documents show, happened to be the same CIA guys now that we see connection with the Boston terror. The Boston terror suspects happen to have ties with Chechnya and this region, Central Asia and Caucasus. This is why from the beginning, from the initial terror incident stage, I kept telling and putting this analysis out there about CIA's MO. Well, now we have Graham Fuller fact coming out. Mainstream media won't be covering it, David, because they won't. Because guess what? I mean, these people, including the State Department, they dictate what New York Times prints, okay?
Oh, the ridiculous thing that you're seeing today, what's breaking all over CNN and all the mainstream media, is the search for Misha, okay? First we're told that these are lone wolf terrorists, and of course that doesn't really jive with anything. There's so many holes in that story. So now they've got to find the lone wolf radicalizer, Misha, some fictional character. And I guess this is the guy that supplied the brothers with the sports cars as well as radicalization. But this just broke in a story that Plotnikov, the guy that basically tied them to Misha, he's no longer alive. So you got the stream of dead bodies that are supposedly the people who are turning this in. But what you said, I want to just repeat what you said here, which is really key, because again, we're told over and over again that 9/11 was blowback from bad foreign policy. But what you saw in the 90s is this guy, Imam Gulen, who is brought to he's basically under indictment in Turkey for being too radical. He's flown to the U.S. in a CIA Learjet, and then this very guy, Graham Fuller, who is the father-in-law of Uncle Ruslan, okay, gives this guy cover and protection when Homeland Security and the FBI want to deport him because they know he's radical. Meanwhile, he turns up, this guy with a 4th grade education, now has $20 billion worth of net worth here in the U.S., and he's somehow able to fund over 350 radical madrasas throughout Europe and the Islamic countries, and he's never left the U.S. I mean, he's all...
No, he hasn't set foot outside the United States. His entire financial centers, his entire headquarters, he has right now, he has one major NGOs and several fork NGOs under that NGOs. His financial centers is in Chicago. He resides in Pennsylvania. And again, this is public information. People can go and put net worth Fethullah Gulen NGO United States, and they will see, and this, it says $20+ billion, okay?
Right.
And nobody knows how this money happens to be within this NGO. And this is one of the main ways CIA launders clean up their operations like the ones involving heroin. That money needs to be laundered, okay? Financial institutions, some of them are in this business with the CIA. But another way is having NGOs like this, because nobody's questioning this NGO that is right now posing, and if you go and look at the mainstream media articles in the United States, they call him a moderate Islamist. You go to the rest of European countries and in Russia and in Central Asia, he's known as a major radical terrorist Islamist, okay? So how they launder this money is also through NGOs like this, because to this date, nobody can source this money. He says, this is Fethullah Gulen, he says these are donations from people in Turkey who really love his work. Turkish government can't even raise that much money in tax, okay?
Right,
and this guy says he's $20 billion a year.
Right.
Network of Foundation is coming through Turkish voluntary donations, and people should just, right now, things should be clicking in people's heads.
Yeah, exactly. But $20 billion is chicken feed when you're looking at the international drug trade that's coming out of Afghanistan that they're running there. And it went from like only 10% to like 90% of the world's trade, and heroin and cocaine and that sort of thing. So it's almost kind of like, I look at this, it's almost like the slave trade that we had. You know, the British had this sweet deal going where they would pick up the slaves in one area, they would drop them off and pick up the sugar cane and go to this place. We got the CIA goes to Afghanistan. They get all this drug money. They can then use that to fund all these black ops. Then they can set up and run these madrasas everywhere and then use that as justification to scare us into surrendering our civil liberties. And then, as we talked about on Friday, it's not even just a domestic agenda that's there, but there's also this international agenda that perhaps they're putting some pressure on the Russians, you know, or making a deal with the Russians so that if the Russians support this, that they can then say, all right, we'll give you some, we'll give on this area, and you guys can kind of back off on, you know, your opposition to the war in Syria, and we'll kind of give you ethical cover for going against these now radical Chechens. Here we are. No Americans have ever heard of anything going on in Chechnya, although there's been a lot of strife with the Russians. And so now we'll back off. We won't criticize you if you go against the Chechens, but maybe you can kind of back off and not oppose us in Syria.
Absolutely. Excellent points you made. Several excellent points you made, David. And see, with Russia, that's one of the things that people, when they, especially people who are not familiar with all the geopolitics, they just look at the surface, the face value of, okay, everything that goes on, let's say, between Russia and the United States, or Central Asia, Caucasus and Russia. They have to look at it broadly, and they have to also get into the context and the history of the area and what has been taking place, not only in the past few weeks, but for the last couple of decades. That's when you start getting a bigger picture. For example, that's a possibility. I'm very careful to emphasize when I say hypothesis, okay? I don't even say theory, because hypothesis is a possibility that the upcoming events and also what we have from the past can come together, may prove it accurate or not. But one of the other areas that there may be an agreement between the United States and Russia is the bigger apple there, okay? And that is Iran, because Syria, who is more important for Russia, Syria or Iran? As part of this, I mean, we just had this WMD a la Iraq popping up with Syria now.
Right.
And things are getting really heated. And again, my prediction, my hypothesis that what is going to happen there is going to happen and be done in the next 2 weeks. And again, goes with the entire timeline with this Boston terror incident and what's happening between Russia and the United States and the backdoor deals. And another agreement may be that we will be basically hands off for a while with Iran, both in terms of some of the sanctions and some of the stuff that have been kind of intensifying, brewing in the background. So another thing I won't be surprised about would be the rhetoric on Iran may get milder, because that's one place that Russia would not compromise. Syria is a different deal, but with Iran, that may be part of the agreement, that you won't be seeing anything really big, major escalation with Iran for at least another year or two, and Russia would be happy with that. And you know, with the WMD a la Iraq, it's very interesting because right now Russia says, well, we need to be part of this inspection team. And if we find out, because Geneva Convention holds, and if we find out that there's been any use, then okay, US, then you have free hands to do this. On the other hand, we are hearing from the Syrian government that says, well, the Al-Qaeda there, our Al-Qaeda, United States Al-Qaeda,
right,
and these terror rebel groups, they are the ones who've been using the WMDs against our soldiers and against people. Mm-hmm. Now, think about it. We give these chemicals to our rebels, and we have already said, yes, they're under us. We have been funding, arming, managing them either directly or through our allies within the Gulf region, through Dubai, through Qatar, you know, through Jordan. And sure, we can supply them, which we have already done so with some chemical weapons, have them use it on the ground, send the inspectors, consent and say, fine, Russians can be part of the thing. And lo and behold, they're going to say, here it is. This is the amount used, and these are the chemical weapons that shows present, and just blame it on Syrian government. I'm just bringing a scenario that is highly likely. And at this stage, Russia is going to be able to save face and say, you know what? After all, Geneva Convention overrides everything else. The report says there is a presence of chemical weapons, okay? And U.S. and all the intelligence agencies says it was Assad. Nobody's broadcasting Assad's government's reports on saying that the rebels have been, the terrorists have been using this. Mm-hmm. And go ahead, U.S., and go ahead, the international community, and within a couple of days, Assad will be gone. So that is, again, that is my hypothesis. That's the prediction that I'm leaning towards, saying this is the likely scenario that we will be seeing, giving Russia also the opportunity to save face.
Wow, that's very interesting. Great analysis, and I've got to say, people have to go to boilingfrogspost.com and take a look at this Gladio B series that you've got there. I've watched only the first hour of it, but it is really packed with information. It puts all these current events in context. It shows the CIA fingerprints are all over this. But more importantly, when we saw the Soviet Union go down in 1989, the military-industrial complex in the United States no longer had a credible enemy that they could use to continue to build and to buy stuff, right? At that point, everybody was saying, how are we going to spend this peace dividend? How are we going to, that's great, because now we've won, now we don't have to spend so much on the military. That got the military-industrial complex very concerned, and if we go back and you look at Gladio B lays this all out, how the CIA went in and funded the new opposition, which could not only replace Russia, but could be something that was far bigger, something that would give them a domestic military police state industrial complex. I mean, this is big. The war on terror is something that was going to deliver for them, something the Cold War could never deliver, and that is an attack on Americans, constant surveillance, constant militarization, and when you look at the way the military is turning inward now in the United States, you can see where the military-industrial complex is headed on this, and it's really important for everybody to understand what was going on in the 1990s in between the fall of the Soviet Union in '89 and September 11th in 2009, and your series really lays that out. Thank you, Sibel, for joining us today.
Thank you. Anytime, David. My pleasure. And thank you for providing the opportunity to put this information out. You're one of very, very, very few alternatives that does that. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, the CIA's fingerprints are all over the Boston Marathon bombing, and we're going to follow that story wherever it leads. So stay tuned to Prison Planet TV. If you're watching on YouTube, try a subscription to support our operation. You know, we have to pay for bandwidth. We have to pay for this operation. We don't get money like MSNBC does from the government. We don't get it from big pockets daddy like George Soros either. So we depend on your support. So that's it for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow at 7 Central, 8 p.m. Eastern.